Thank you for listening to Torah Media Atlanta. Won't you consider making a donation to help support this important work? Just go to TorahMediaAtlanta.com and click on the donate link. Thank you very much.
All right, good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and a Freilichen Hanukkah to all.
To all, good night. I'm sorry, I couldn't resist.
Okay. So it's exciting to be able to give class on Hanukkah. Of course, looking around, I guess it's Hanukkah.
Some things are better left.
And the Greeks have won again. Sorry. I mean, people are busy. I understand. A couple announcements before we begin this evening. First of all, y'all are invited to a Hanukkah party that will be taking place right here in a matter of days. Sunday evening, 5:30, 7:30. We're going to have a wild and fun and exciting. Sorry, wild is not the right word, right?
It's Purim.
Purim, right. Sorry. Enlightening. How's that? So all of you are invited to join us right here, 5:30, 7:30 on Sunday evening. Number two is, in as much as you all are invited on Motzei Shabbos, the 18th of December, to our home for a Malav Malka. You can come even if you don't RSVP. The RSVP is just doing us a favor in letting us know how many sofas we need to take out of the home in order to be able to accommodate that number of people coming. I did realize that perhaps you don't have my phone number or my email address. I would like to give it to you regardless, just in case you have any questions, or if you ever have a question based on the class or not based on the class.
Is there a reason you didn't give it to us?
Is there a reason? Yeah, I try not to clog up my email account. The phone number 404-246-7856. Once again, 404-246-7856 is my cell phone number. Feel free to leave me a message any time of day or night. It does not disturb anyone.
You never listen to us.
That's exactly why it doesn't disturb anyone. And my email address is michoel at precifix.com. 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 Again, michoel at precifix.com. Everybody get that? Great. Okay, so December 18th, Motzei Shabbos, and this coming Sunday, Hanukkah party. And what? Where what? Oh, you'd like to know that too? 5206 5206 Daventry, Davantry, Daventry Drive, and that's in Dunwoody. Daventry is a combination of two words, daven and try.
Oh, interesting. And what time?
8:30 p.m. Okay, as a teacher, I always love it when Providence ordains that Hanukkah, or maybe I should say it the other way around, that tonight's class falls out on the first night of Hanukkah.
Right.
Because indeed, I hope last week you enjoyed your time with your family, extended family. We took a little break. 2 weeks ago we spoke about light. And indeed, tonight the discussion continues about light. But this time in a framework of Hanukkah. So we're going to depart a little bit off topic, but we'll start with the launching pad of our verse, discuss it a little bit, but then expand it to be able to treat the subject of Hanukkah within our context. So we are in Pasuk Gimel, and for that matter Pasuk Dalet as well. In Pasuk Gimel we say, Vayomer Elokim Yehi Or Vayihi Or. God says, let there be light, and there was light. The questions we had 2 weeks ago, anybody remember? What? What came first? Chicken and egg? No, not talking about day or night yet. Good. So first, the what?
You said creation took place with
Creation took place, right? That was verse 1. Creation of everything in potential form takes place in verse 1. Then we speak about an element of confusion and an apparent transition into beginning to organize things. And then we have our first organizational step, creating light. So clearly the fact that light is created or organized first is enlightening. Why?
No.
Why would that come first? That took you a little long.
Getting tired of it. Give a little clarity.
Good. So light, we said, is clarity. Clearly, if we're to proceed with the process of organization, we're going to have clarity. What are we going to have clarity in? Okay, which aspect of the process of creation is necessary for organization? Okay, so 2 weeks ago we spoke about clarity of what the essence and the purpose of the object that we're looking at is. A person gets a label maker, it's not going to help him unless he knows what it is that he's labeling. The label maker doesn't create the category. It identifies the category. So unless you know what you're looking at, you have no idea how to define it, first of all, for its own self, and second of all, in the bigger picture of how this fits in to the ultimate purpose of creation. So we're going to need some clarity. And that indeed is why light is first, before anything else. So we have Vayomer Elokim Yi'or Vayi'or. Let's take a look at the next verse just for a moment. We're going to have a full treatment in the coming weeks, but for tonight's purpose, let's take a look at the next verse. Vayar Elokim es Arki Tov. God sees the light, that it is good. Vayavdel Elokim ben ha'or ben ha'choshech. And God separates between the light and the darkness. Questions? Is what? There's no darkness. Okay? Question number 1. What is the darkness that's being referred to in this verse? Good. Question 2.
Why there's no darkness? Why does God see when God's created it? Why does God speak? Why does God see? Who is God speaking to?
Good.
Why is the light good? What do you mean by good? It's every word.
You're right. That's exactly it. Every word is problematic here. Problematic in the sense that we have no idea what's being referred to. Yes?
This is totally problematic, but you define light from darkness. Not even from this part of darkness, you define it from...
Good question. The question is that if you're dividing light from darkness, does that mean that light and darkness are one before you divide it?
But he created darkness, he created light, so therefore everything was light. And then he created darkness.
No.
First he created light, then he created darkness. How do you know that?
Well, it says that he created light, and that was good. And then he divided the light from darkness. So he must have created darkness.
Okay.
He had darkness as well as a light.
Okay, now one could perhaps argue, I definitely hear the point, one could perhaps argue that darkness is not a creation. It's just the absence of creation.
Right, about connotation, talk about color, white versus dark, black.
Good, but good thought.
This whole section is just filled with factual and spiritual.
You were prepared for that, weren't you?
Oh yeah, Look at that whole thing.
I look forward to the next time you're going to use that one. We have a numbering system. How about 1 to 10? You just score me. Yes.
The whole sentence is filled with things. God said. That's a factual. He said that up. Some people say, from the spiritual side, that's what makes man different from all the other animals of the world, the fact that we can speak. Like, you wake up begin your life, everything is dark, and light creates reality in front of you. Chaos to organization. When you could go spiritually wherever you want to go with it. There's a lot in there.
Okay, very good point. Again, let's focus on questions on the verse before we explore possible explanations. Yes?
Two questions.
Yes.
And God separated what between light, between darkness?
Separated what? It seems from the verse that He separated between light and darkness.
Separated what between light and darkness?
Separated light from darkness and darkness from light.
Separated what?
She emphasized on the what.
I realize that. I'm wondering what the what means. Okay?
And does this mean that God took it away?
Took what away?
The light.
Ooh, you looked in Rashi. That's a no-no. That's kidding. Okay, I'm sorry. Okay, I don't know. What would make you say in the verse that He took it away? It just says that He divided one from the other.
So because He separated it.
Yeah.
So when He separated something, He made it something, put someone different.
If I am making cheese and I put milk into lemon juice or vinegar and I separate the curds from the whey,
You're taking from it.
I'm taking it away? What am I taking away?
Make it away.
Away? Right. I'm not taking it away, I'm taking away. Thank you for catching me on that one.
When you separate something,
Okay, when you separate something, it is removing it. How many would agree with that statement? How many would disagree? You may be right. The way I'm understanding it is separation is something is mixed.
so you're taking it from the initial entity.
You're taking it from what?
The initial entity, you're taking it away from.
I am moving away from a confused state to now two distinct objects.
Right.
And one is light and one is
that.
I've separated this from this and this from that.
You're removing it. These are removed down together.
Okay, I understand what you're saying. You're saying to remove it from the entanglement that it's in. Good. Okay, fair enough. Yeah.
I wasn't like the first one. I mean, he saw that life was good. I mean, this guy's creation, why is it good? I mean, what is it?
Excellent question. What in the world does good mean? Obviously, if God made it, it's good. Great question. It's almost right. Nobody knows what good means, or maybe everyone thinks they know what good means, but then they realize that I don't know where I got that concept from.
And the light is complete.
Yeah.
Which
Complete. Okay. How do you know that?
wait, was darkness good?
Was darkness good?
Or just light was good?
I don't know. It says that he saw that the light was good.
What about darkness?
It doesn't say anything about darkness.
Darkness is good when you're thinking.
I second that. When the clock switches, it is
Good could be like excellent, or good could be like good in nature, like a way of being at the essence of.
Again, what are the two categories of good? It's either excellent.
Say this is good, like excellent.
Excellent meaning what?
Meaning like I like this. It's pleasing.
So that's subjective good.
Versus the essence of light is
Objective good.
yeah.
Okay, subjective versus objective. Yes.
Maybe God separated Himself
Whoa.
from the light and the darkness.
Separating himself. I don't know if he can do that.
Because Himself is his light, where light is corrupt. We talked about that before. That is clearly good. Darkness is the absence of.
Okay, but again, separation, I don't know if God could separate himself from something, because he's not a physical entity and therefore cannot separate.
Separatable.
He's not separatable. I guess that's a good word. How do I know that he's not physical?
Well, we can't see.
Well, the answer is that it's an excellent question. It's number one of the tenets of faith. And number two is that anything that's physical has a time limit on it, is not eternal. So an eternal being is someone that is transcendent, that's above everything that's created. Because if God is a creation in and of himself, or itself, then what created him? And this is an ongoing, perpetual paradox, which ends up, there are abilities to prove it empirically, if you will, right? But we don't deal with the complex proofs of trying to understand why it's an impossibility for a God that creates and is above that which he creates to say that he must be an entity above everything that he created. Right? So that's the assumption that God is a spiritual entity that is above and beyond anything that he creates. So once we understand that, to say the concept of separation can only take place between objects. Objects can be separated. In fact, it's very interesting that the word for spirituality, anybody know what the biblical Hebrew word for spirituality is? That's sanctity, holiness. What about spirituality?
The Hebrew
Ruach. Ruchniut. Ruach. And what about physicality? Gashmiut.
what?
Gashmiut. So we have Ruchniut and Gashmiut. Now it's very interesting. One of them is used to describe spirituality. One of them is used to describe physicality. The interesting thing is that those two words are borrowed concepts. Ruach means
Breath
wind,
or wind.
and Geshem
Breath.
is rain.
So one is more concrete or more physical than the other?
Why is that?
Oh, wind can't be touched as much as rain can be touched.
Okay, I would say even more than that. It's not just that one can be touched and one can't be touched. Okay, you can't see it, right? So number one, you can't touch it, you can't see it. You can see the results of it. You can see its effects. So all these are very spiritual concepts. But more than that is that rain comes down in Rain comes down in pieces. There are pieces of rain. We call them raindrops. But there are pieces, separate components. Wind, it's unified. It's one unified mass. It's inseparable. It doesn't have a form. So now we understand that those two concepts of Ruach and Geshem being used to describe concepts that we simply can't get our minds around because we don't relate to spiritual entities, but we do relate to wind and we do relate to rain, and therefore we very much can use those as analogies to understand these concepts. They're tough to understand. So just... The what?
Is life. I mean, life is not physical.
It's like the wind.
It is most definitely, it is very physical in the sense that it can be, we don't see it as physical because it's not something that you could touch, but it's something that your sensory perception picks up. Your five senses only work in a physical world. You hear sound waves, you see light waves, you could touch, you could smell. These are all physical. Can you sense spirituality? Yes. Not with your senses.
But Ruach, wind, you can.
Right. That's why it's an analogy. It's as best as we can get. Of course, it's not an accurate analogy because the best way to describe spirituality is to use spirituality as an example. The problem with that is that you won't get anywhere. In fact, it's very interesting. Sorry to go off topic, but just a fascinating thought. The word for analogy, parable. Anybody know? Mushal. A mushal, mem shin lamed, is an analogy or a parable. Now, what's the purpose of a parable? To tell a story. For what purpose? To teach. Why do I need a story to teach? Besides, it makes it interesting.
To make it more understandable.
Why? How does that happen?
It puts it in human terms. It puts it in human terms.
Good. So in other words, we're teaching a concept, And that concept is beyond my personal experience. So how do I bridge the gap between my own personal experience and this concept which is way out of reach? So maybe if we give a story to illustrate, as was said, that would help communicate the thought, albeit it's limited, it's clearly not the concept, but at least it bridges somewhat the wide gap between my personal experience and that concept. The difference between the word for a king and the word for a totalitarian despot in Hebrew, what's a king? Melech. What is a dictator? It's not an easy word. Now, Amalek is a nation. A leader that rules with force is a Michoel. Hey, 1 second. A Michoel and a Mashal have the very same root. Why? They're both rulers. How so?
They both have control.
Okay, they both have control over something that ordinarily is beyond control. To be able to rule over people that don't want to be ruled upon, but to rule upon them with force is what a Michoel is. So a Mashal is essentially the same. It takes a concept that is beyond reach and allows me to grab a hold of it and to control it, or to be in control of it. So a perfect analogy, there is no such thing as a perfect analogy. But as close as we can get to grabbing an idea that is way beyond our experience, whatever can help us bridge that gap, we're better off than we were before. We're at least slightly more in control.
Well, if there's a concept which is beyond our understanding, how do we know this parallel or this example that you're giving is what the concept is?
Good question.
The concept itself is
That's an excellent question.
anything we can understand.
It's an excellent question. So that's why it's so important to define things. In fact, we're going to see over and over again that names are essential to organization, because names define essence. It's interesting that the term neshama, which is a soul, has within those 4 letters, nun, shin, mem, he, within those letters are a shin and a mem. A name. So in the very words for soul, the interior letters are a name, which means that a name penetrates the essence of the object. And that's why naming is so important, and naming cannot be an arbitrary process. It's not just, hey, let's call this a cup. Well, who decided that this was a cup? I don't know. A bunch of people decided that we'll agree that when I say cup, you understand what I'm talking about. That is the deficiency of every language except for Biblical Hebrew. Because Biblical Hebrew, the words that describe objects are not arbitrary identifying elements. They are essential definitions. Now, that may be beyond our understanding. In other words, if you tell me that an eagle is a nesher, and I say, why? So I can't explain it. Kabbalists probably could, because they understand the letters nun, shin, and resh, and they understand that that particular combination results in something called an eagle. In fact, later on, we'll find out that God turns to Adam and he says, go name all the animals. And we have midrashic literature that describes the process. A horse came in front of it, and he called it a sus. Why? Well, if you understand what a samach and a samach is, and you understand how the vav links the 2 samach together, then you understand why that represents the essential nature of a horse. Chamor is a donkey. Why? Because ches Mem, Resh. The root identifies the particular spiritual DNA that these three letters combine like little Lego blocks. We put these two together, and sometimes if you switch the two letters, it's a totally different object. H2O is water. H2O2 is hydrogen peroxide. Do not make lemonade with H2O2. Well, what do you mean? It's just another oxygen molecule. I mean, what's the big deal? Well, yeah. You may think, what's the big deal, until you drink it and realize that one little molecule in a different location changes the entirety of life. Okay, now that we're far afield, let's get back into what we were talking about. So what we were just talking about, Michoel, Ruach, Geshem, Ruchnias, Gashmias, and how the spirituality is essentially whole and physicality is parts and pieces. And in fact, as we transition from the physical world to the spiritual world, we will find things fusing together and becoming much more unified, because that's the nature of spirituality. Yes, question?
You just used an example where you took a four-letter word, took two letters in the middle, and created a concept for the name. A lot of times you hear people apply these analogies to Hebrew. Now, you sit down and you write a story, or you create a story, but how do you create a language that just has, and this is probably the only example throughout the language. I mean, two cavemen sitting there talking and trying to create a language. Whoever thought of that word, I don't know, did he think that he was going to create the word sharing?
That's correct.
It's got to be God inspired all of it.
You're absolutely correct. In fact, that is why the biblical Hebrew language, and I stress biblical Hebrew, because modern Hebrew, although it is based on biblical Hebrew, but many of the concepts clearly, first of all, never existed in the times of the Torah to be able to even be labeled and created. Clearly a Michonit, an automobile, is not going to be found in Torah. So clearly we cannot start taking apart those words and try to figure out what Eliezer ben Yehuda, who came up with many of the words of the language, thought of when he did that. What is very interesting is that Eliezer ben Yehuda, when he was creating modern Hebrew, he would consult with Rabbi Avram Yitzchak HaKohen Kook, the first chief rabbi of Israel, who had an encyclopedic memory and understanding of all of written Torah and the oral law, but specifically the written Torah, and he would ask him, what does this root mean? See if you could find that particular root in either Chumash or in the prophets or the writings, and let's see what biblically it's used for, and let's see if we could borrow the concept and apply it to this new modern thing. So clearly it was based on the biblical Hebrew, but it has gone beyond. So biblical Hebrew is what the sages called a lashon be'etzem, an intrinsic language. It is not like any other language, which is a convention of two people or a group of people that decide that this is going to be the word that's going to be used to describe it. A door, a window, a table. What does the word table have to do with a horizontal object that has legs, that is able to support things and help me eat like a mensch? I don't know. Now, it would be fascinating to see the etymological roots of the word table and to figure out what its Greek, German, Latin derivatives are, and to really travel all the way back to the source, to the source, to the source, which is actually what is the source of all languages. When we get to the Tower of Babel story in approximately a decade, then we'll... Right. May we all be here and beyond. We find that the Torah describes that all the nations of the world had Safa Echas, one language. And Rashi, based on the Midrash, says that that language was biblical Hebrew. And it was from there that when they were deteriorating on the tower and God had to confuse them, that God divided the languages, perhaps even dialects of biblical Hebrew, and there was a slow evolution process, perhaps. But clearly, the entire world was speaking one language, and then there was a division of languages. So everything emanates back to biblical Hebrew. In fact, there's a fascinating book by a Professor Moseson called The Word. Wait.
Leslie's
Factual and what?
Leslie's Keller portion. Something about Pharaoh and Joseph, and he didn't speak Hebrew, Pharaoh.
He did not, right?
And he expected Joseph, who was going to be chief of Egypt, to learn all the other languages of the world.
That's correct. That's correct. In fact, there are 70 root languages of the world. The 71st is biblical Hebrew.
71st.
There are some that say it's the 70th, some that say 71st. We can talk about it. But the bottom line is that this Professor Moseson realized that if everything is rooted in biblical Hebrew, wouldn't it be interesting to survey the English language and to find similarities between English words that have perhaps derivatives from Latin, Greek, French, Old French, German, and to be able to see if there's similarities in biblical Hebrew. And it's a fascinating work. Again, it's speculative. Nobody says it's authoritative because nobody needs to say it's authoritative. It's interesting. It's an interesting thesis. Just as an example, the word for meat is basar. What do we call in the English language somebody that chops meat? Butcher. Interesting. The sound that comes out of your throat when you're feeling rotten is a groan. A throat in biblical Hebrew is garon. Interesting. The word for neck, actually the back of the neck, is a tough one. Oreth. Biblical Hebrew. Oreth. What do we, even in Georgia, put on our necks to keep it warm? A scarf from Oreth. One last one. A fruit, a little round fruit that grows on a bush, is a is a berry. What is a fruit in biblical Hebrew? Pri. Right? It's actually interesting. If you take what is plural of fruit in biblical Hebrew? Peirot. Peirot. Now drop all the vowels, and what do those letters spell? Fruit. Again, it's interesting. It's fascinating. It can sprinkle and pepper your thoughts with some. What? Yeah. So the Chinese, the Far Eastern languages are way off the chart. Like where those came from and what they're based on, I have no idea. So again, that's why that's challenging to speculate that it was just dialects of biblical Hebrew and they kind of just evolved. So I could hear that with the Germanic and the Slavic and here's the lady languages, right? Okay, yeah, question.
So I get that words can derive from Hebrew, but as much as I enjoy that, then I come up with, okay, Latin, we have words that derive from Latin, French, and English, and that, and so on, so they derive. I'd like to assert something you can explain better than I can assert.
Perhaps.
That the intrinsic quality of the letters and the words are different in Hebrew than they are in these other languages that derive from those.
That's exactly it. That's exactly what we're saying. Is that biblical Hebrew is an intrinsic language, which means that the letters themselves have meanings. And if we would be able to understand, 2 years ago we gave a class in building blocks of creation. All right, we got all the way to which letter? Samach? Mem. Okay, we'll have to finish it off next year. All right, we got all the way up to Mem. Each letter has a powerful meaning that is not overlapped by any other letter. Every letter has an essential meaning. So if we would be able to understand the essential deep meaning of every letter, then to us it would almost be obvious why this particular word refers to that object. Now, unfortunately, we don't. The few letters that we do know, the few letters that we can understand, when we put it together, we realize, wow, this is not anything that could be done with any other language, because every other language was just created by convention, by agreement. It's not intrinsic. It's not that the word defines the object. It's that the word represents the object. It's a very different type of language.
If a language defines a people, for example.
That's what you're saying, not what I'm saying.
In many of the African languages, there's no concept of tomorrow and the day after. They speak about today, meaning tomorrow. And that is a limiting factor on their ability to plan. In certain European languages, it's very basic, guttural, hard to, very long letters, a lot of complication. In English, it's a very free-flowing language, which borrows and constantly changes. So it makes us different from the rest of the world. It's structured, but it's very loose. Is Hebrew the biblical language of the world, and it stays within its own world?
It's a very good point.
In other words, they need Hebrew in order to free it so that you can grow and develop new ideas in science without limiting yourself.
Okay, I'm going to try to answer your question concisely based on the way I understand your question. You're asking is based on the assumption that a language represents the culture of the people, because clearly if a word does not exist in that culture, then it does not exist. If a word does not exist in the language of that culture, then the concept doesn't exist in that culture. Because if the concept does exist, then we have to come up with a word for it. So if that's the case, what is the culture of the Torah? Does the Torah allow for an expansion of concepts and thereby forcing itself to come up with new terms, which clearly cannot be because the Torah is a frozen document? Is that what you were asking?
Basically.
Good. I'm glad I understood it.
But that goes beyond, I think there's a lot of tricks in beyond language though, because you can talk about Shabbos and space at the same time.
That's a whole different discussion of application of Torah principles. But he's asking conceptually, in terms of culture, if a concept does not exist in Torah, does it exist? And the answer is no. And it's an astounding revelation. Okay? Which really creates a paradigm shift in our whole understanding of things, because instead of superimposing our own concepts and ideas, if we take it in the reverse and we look at the Torah and we say, does the Torah share our understanding of this concept? Either one of two things. Either that concept doesn't exist, or the Torah has a different understanding of that concept. Then instead of us saying, well, that doesn't make any sense, we flip the whole thing around and say, clearly the Torah is the blueprint of reality. And therefore, if we, culture, has created a concept, we have to judge it by the measuring stick of the Torah. Just as an example, the word adventure, there is no word for adventure in Torah. Okay? Not that I want to go far afield, something to think about. Let it percolate while you're sitting in traffic.
Does that mean adventure doesn't exist?
That means that the concept of adventure does not exist in Torah. Now, if Torah is creating a blueprint of reality, does that say that the concept of adventure can't exist? Or that the concept of adventure does not exist in a true version of the life that the Torah is meant to be teaching us? It's a wild concept to kind of wrap your mind around. But it is an extremely important concept to understand that the Torah is now being used as a template, as a blueprint. And the language of the Torah is used as a blueprint. And in fact, if we are trying to understand a concept, the very first thing that we need to do is turn to its first appearance in Torah and use that as the guide to helping us understand what that concept means. And indeed, to take it full circle, we have a word over here called tov, good. We can have a 5-hour discussion of the concept of good, and we will result in absolutely nothing. Because it will be pure speculation, and it would be your opinion and my opinion, and if I'm a good debater, which I'm not, I'll win. I'll trump everybody else's suggestions because of my ability to be able to convince everyone of my opinion. Does that make it an objective reality? Absolutely not. It just means that we wasted 5 hours of our life talking about something that we have absolutely no way of defining. Unless we have an objective point of reference. Fighter pilots know that the state of vertigo is a very difficult state to be in. Because if you don't have a horizon, then you could be flying upside down. Now you may think, who cares? Well, when you push the eject button, you care. You would like to know which way is up. Now, of course, I think they have gyroscopes in the eject.
What is the concept?
Whoa. Okay. How do I help you define what a concept is? Good. Goodness. Good. What is good? I have a good grade, a good job, a good wife, good
Lunch.
good lunch. Yeah. Okay, now define good. In every one of those examples, the word good shifts. So they go, well, it's everything. It's anything that anyone would like it to be. We all know that that's ridiculous.
How could the Torah cover every concept in one?
I'm not saying anything. I'm excited. Yes, you're hitting the root of something. Yeah, go ahead.
Because we know, or we have ideas today that they did not have those ideas 300 years ago.
Good. Are you talking about technology? That's a very different thing that we're talking about. Again, we're talking about ideas. We're not talking about the development of the world. Clearly, in terms of application, the Torah will have to have the mechanism in place to be able to be applied throughout history beyond the agrarian culture that the Torah describes. And indeed, 3,000 years later, it's still functioning. So clearly the mechanism was put in place. What we're talking about is concepts. If one is to try to understand what gratitude is, or what goodness is, or what ambition is, well, again, we could philosophize, we could take out books in a library, we could read what other people's thoughts are, but where does that get us? If we don't have something that we can firmly stabilize ourselves in, then it's subjective. And we all know that subjectivity doesn't really give us a sense of security and being. So, I just gave a home group 2 weeks ago about gratitude. And we spoke about the Hebrew term for gratitude called hakarat hatov. Well, that's very nice. So what is gratitude? I don't know. It's thanking people, recognizing the good. Recognizing the good. What does that mean? So I borrowed, it wasn't me, I was actually looking up through the sources to see where is the root of this idea. Well, it's interesting that the word hakara, to recognize, is used twice in Torah. Hakerna is a term, please recognize. Number one is used in the story of Yehuda and Tamar, last week's story. And in the very same parsha, we have the brothers who show the cloak to their father and say, recognize this? Well, that's interesting. The only 2 times that the word haker is used. Well, what does it mean there? Does it mean intellectually recognize, know what this is? Or does it mean know and recognize the implications of that knowledge? It's not just yiddi'ah, knowledge. Hakara, recognition, is to take that intellectual understanding and to realize that there is an implication, there are repercussions to that knowledge. Whoa! Well, that opens up a whole new idea in understanding what this concept of gratitude is. I'm just using this as an example. Right? Gemilut chasadim. Acts of loving kindness. No, that's not what that means. Because acts are ma'asim. So we should have ma'asim chasadim. Actions of kindness. No, we call it gemilut. Well, that's a strange word. What does that mean? Well, if we took a look at the root of gemilut, we would see that it's gimel mem lamed, which is gimel, which is the same root as the third letter of the alphabet, which is number 3. And the letter 3, the letter for 3, gimel, actually means stability. Right? In fact, the strongest geometrical shape in mathematics is a triangle. It gives something stability. Right? There's a lot more. I'm not giving a class on kindness, but when we understand that, we realize that an act of kindness alone is not good enough. The Rambam, Maimonides, lists out the highest form of kindness is to provide somebody with the ability to go on their own, which means to provide them with stability. Not just to constantly feed them and give them, to give them the ability of giving on their own. Well, isn't it interesting that the word for weaning, vayigamel, to wean a child, which means to provide him with the nutrients that they need to be able to now go on their own without having to become dependent. And isn't it interesting that a camel is called a gamal because we fill it up with water and we let it go on its own so that it can endure for a long time. All these things are all rooted in the letters of the Hebrew language. And in biblical Torah Hebrew, the words are so essential, which is one of the primary reasons why if you're translating things into English, you're going to have a problem. It is something that we need to do until we learn the essence of the language. But to recognize that the English language is very limited. Because clearly it's not going to have the three-dimensional quality that we need in order to fully appreciate what we're reading. Yes?
Okay, so let's get back to the word good or tov. Is it tov?
It is tov.
Okay, so what we're trying to figure out is what the essence of that word is. Is that correct?
Well, we know what the essence of the word is because the word is tov. We're trying to figure out what tov means.
Okay, so we're trying to figure out what tov means. And so I'm getting a little confused now. So how do we do that?
Good. So now the very first step would be to see other places that the word is used. And in fact, there's a book called a concordance. Anybody know what a concordance is?
It lists where every word in the Bible is.
Good. It lists where every word in the Bible is. So, it's a very interesting book. Most people, when they see it, they get scared because it looks like a phone book. But it's not meant to read. It's a reference tool. Now, why would anybody put together a book that just lists out every appearance of a word in Torah? The answer is because wouldn't it be interesting? You know, in photography nowadays, they have focus coming from 3 different positions, right? Satellite global positioning system is not just one beam. It's 3 different satellites that zero in to understanding your location. Why? Because one beam isn't reliable enough. But when we come in from all directions and we pinpoint your position, that's much more reliable. Interesting. 3 triangulate. There you go. There we go.
What did we have before we had biblical Hebrew?
Nothing. In fact, the Torah tells us, the Midrash actually describes, that God used the letters in creating the world. Which means that it's literally the building blocks of creation. Which means that everything that's created is created with these letters. Now to us, that's obvious. Because we live in a world where DNA, deoxyribonucleic acid. DNA? Oh, there we go. Okay, thank you. So, what is it? It's basically 4 different protein peptides, A, C, G, T. This is pulling out. AGCT. Thank you. Okay. It's been a long time. AGCT. Now what is it? AGCT. 4 letters. 4 letters. That's it. Every organic entity is created from a double helix chain of 4 letters. And it's just a question of how to arrange them. Now, if that doesn't blow your mind, I don't know what can. Now, to us, it's like, yeah, of course. What do you mean, of course? 4 letters. Everything. So now when we take a look at the Aleph Beis, 22, whoa, that's remarkable. So, again, to answer your question, sorry, I don't know whose question I'm answering, but to answer your question, how do we know what the word means? Well, let's look elsewhere, see the context that the word is used, and then we can actually create a construct based on that, which is more than unidimensional. It is 3-dimensional, because it's coming from different angles, and it's coming to establish something that is real. And that will help us provide some basis for a definition. So here's our first usage of the word, tov. Good. I don't know what good is. I have no idea. How am I supposed to proceed? Well, it's interesting because in a couple of other verses we'll have the word tov not mentioned. And then a couple of verses later we'll say that God states what is not good. Ooh, okay. So now it's getting juicy. Now we have what to talk about. And with that, I bid you all a happy Hanukkah.